back. Let's talk about neoliberalism. People, you know, it's a big word that means a couple of really, really simple things. And for example, right now the Democratic Party is got this internal battle going on about the so-called problem solvers, little $500 billion new money over infrastructure bill. You know, it basically fills potholes and rebuilds bridges, which is fine, but you know, it's just. It's and by the way, it has huge subsidies for-profit companies, and it includes public-private partnerships, which are all, you know, part of this kind of new world that Ronald Reagan brought us. On the other hand, there's this $3.5 trillion bill that progressives are pushing that is really a reversion back to LBJ and FDR, to the classic progressive way of doing things. So what is neoliberalism? Well, neoliberalism includes free trade, austerity and tax cuts, and deregulation and privatization. Those basically 5 things in 3 categories. The free trade part, we were sold free trade by Reagan and his buddies as the end to wars. Thomas Friedman, in fact, came up with this thing called the McDonald's theory, that in the history of the world, no 2 countries that had McDonald's had ever gone to war with each other. Well, it turns out it's not true, but this was the sales pitch. If we simply do away with national borders with regard to money and with regard to corporations, we keep them on people, right? We move it across national borders. But we free up big money, billionaires and corporations, so that they can completely ignore national borders, then and our economy becomes so interdependent with, for example, China's economy, that we'll never go to war with China because, hey, we'd both be crazy to do that because who wants to crash our mutual economies? That was the theory. And it seemed to make a certain amount of sense, except now China is starting to look a little more belligerent. It was also supposed to eliminate poverty in the world. You know, the theory was that, you know, rich countries are protecting their workers and keeping wages high, and poor countries don't have, you know, industries. So if we move some of those industries to the poor countries, they will, you know, they're low wage right now. Eventually, they'll become middle class and they'll make more money, and the whole world will rise out of poverty. Well, there was a grain of truth to that, too. China now has a middle class that's larger than the entire population of the United States. Contrast that to when I was there in 1988. I spent November of 1988 in Beijing, and it was one incredibly poor country. There wasn't a single skyscraper in Beijing. The tallest building was the Hilton Hotel. It was 11 stories. But how do they get that rich? Well, we lost 50,000 factories. It gutted the American middle class. 10 years ago, you know, we for the first time since the post-war era, we hit the point where fewer than half of Americans class. Austerity, which is another part of this, was supposed to end crime, end ghettos, and cut poverty in America. Why? Because the theory went, as Reagan talked about, basically lazy people, which for black people, are not working. They're staying in their ghettos, Reagan was saying, because they get paid to have babies. And we need to end that. And this is the neoliberal story. And so, you know, let's end welfare as we know it. And let's double down on tough crime penalties, 3 strikes and you're out, and things like that, to end the super predators in our cities. Reagan told this story of how upset, you know, good white people in line at the supermarket got when a strapped out his food stamps to pay for his beer and steak. Seriously. There's a link to it in the story if you want to read the actual thing. This was his male version of his welfare queen thing. And deregulation was supposed to let the magic of the marketplace work. And instead, what did it bring us? Deregulation brought us more poisoning. You know, I mean, and the Flint water crisis, for example. Well, this was the privatization part of it. Privatization was another piece of neoliberalism. Privatization, the whole Flint water crisis was the result of an effort to privatize the water supply of Flint. This is what Republican Governor Rick Snyder was up to in Michigan. And You know, it was also, deregulation was also supposed to end economic depressions. In 1999, when Republican Senator Phil Gramm stood on the floor of the Senate and said, you know that Glass-Steagall thing that keeps the checkbook banks and the gambling Wall Street banks separate? That worked out just fine, but we don't need that anymore. And so they blew it up, which brought us right to the 2008 Bush crash. Privatization was also supposed to make our power systems more resilient and our schools better. Right, and it's now California and Texas have rolling blackouts. But Reagan put this into law and into policy in 1981, and every president since Reagan, including the Democratic presidents, Clinton and Obama, have embraced neoliberalism. And now Joe Biden is seriously talking about rejecting large chunks of this neoliberal agenda. And that's inside the Democratic Party right now, with the big infrastructure bill versus the small infrastructure bill. It's the neoliberals against the progressives. And if the neoliberals win, this country will slide deeper into oligarchy and the strongman kind of government necessary to enforce it will become more like Russia or Hungary. On the other hand, if the progressives win, then I think we have a good chance of going back to the era of FDR and LBJ, where we're actually taking care of America, we're reviving democracy, we're creating enthusiasm for a progressive, positive, forward-moving country, you know, taking us back to the era of Jack Kennedy. I think it's entirely possible, but an awful lot is riding right now on this legislation.